Welcome to Jackson Reviews, the review channel where I go through the best and worst horror movies so you don't have to. I'm Sam Jackson and today we're going to be reviewing Friday the 13th Part 3, released in 1982. Now, Friday the 13th 1 and 2 were kind of carbon copies of each other. This one at least got some differences. It was still made extremely quickly, although this time being 16 months to make and release it, compared to 11, which was just so stupid. The main reason it took so long is because this time they originally had a script already prepared and thought through, and then casting issues got in the way with the lead actress Amy Steele from Part 2 unable to reprise her role. Because of that, they had to recast the main character and redo the whole script so they could have a brand new storyline, brand new group of people, kind of costing the studio a lot of money and redoing the initial plan. The worst part was the initial idea sounded pretty cool and very similar to Halloween 2, which is my personal favourite of Halloween franchise, so I'm sad we've lost this. The film was also originally going to end the series, and also ended up knocking off E.T. the Extraterrestrial from the #1 box office spot. That's how good, and loved these movies were at the time. Maybe good's a bit of an over-exaggeration. But anyway, without further ado, let's do this review. I'm not proud of that. The movie begins right where the last one left off, with Jason doing a bit of shopping at a couple's house, but he has a bit of a disagreement with the owners, deciding one needs a breather and the other one needs to quieten down. Later on, Chris Higgins, my personal favourite protagonist, goes on a little road trip with her friends to a family cabin Higgins Haven. This seems the main influence of the opening of Cabin in the Woods. So there you go, you've got 6 fun facts this time. The victims this time around are a little bit more colourful than in Part 2, with a pregnant couple and annoying prankster Shelley, a couple of fun stoners and Chris's old friend Vera. The film even has a new Crazy Ralph with Abel. Must be Crazy Ralph's crazy cousin or something. And when we get to the cabin we meet Rick, Chris's other half. No will they won't they storyline of this movie like in the first two, these are a proper couple. Evidently only one who's going to make it, so this is going to get depressing by the end. The group begin to set up at Higgins Haven until Shelley and Vera decide that we need to go out for a few more supplies. They bump into a few bikers, so they have a slight disagreement with some bikes. So bikers decide to have a little bit of a follow back and burn down Chris's barn. Don't worry Chris, because your old pal Jason's here to take care of these people. Now Jason isn't really a fan of anyone who does any crimes except for murder, so he decides to have a little bit of a conversation and some spiky words with the bikers. And when that doesn't work out, just a good old-fashioned punching with a giant metal pole is what works out best for these lot. Later on when it's dark out, Chris and Rick decide to go for a little bit of a stroll together, just like couples do in the middle of the night when there's a weird slasher in the woods, because that's how these movies have to kill. But the lovely little stroll is ruined when Chris suddenly develops PTSD by looking at a tree. Hey, there's a lot of rhymes going on in this episode, and I'm very, very sorry for that. She mentions a previously mentioned backstory about her and Jason meeting up in the woods, and honestly, it doesn't seem even half as fun as this little meet up with Rick in the woods. Back at Higgins, it's the usual slasher affair, where since the main protagonist is away, the killers will come and slay. These are getting less and less funny every single time, but I just really don't know how to stop doing it, I'm sorry! But one of the most important reasons why this scene is, just so awesome to me, is the fact this is the first time you will ever see Jason holding the hockey mask, and also, Shelley dies in it. He decides to say hi to Vera first, but because of her loud mouth, he decides to quieten her up a little bit with a spear to the face. He then teaches Andy to always protect his genitals, because hey, you don't want any nasty diseases in there, do you? And he's even quite a gentleman to Debbie. Even though he hits a woman, he doesn't hurt the baby, so that's good news. After those lessons, Professor Jason decides to teach a few more things to Chuck about electronic safety, but Chuck doesn't listen and just flies right in there. And just before he's able to teach Chili anything, she decides to do a Survivor Girl run, even though she's not the Survivor Girl. Overcompensating for something. The Jason's not very happy that she's not taking any of his lessons to heart and gives her a little bit of a poke in the ribs. Chris and Rick decide to head back to the cabin and find it weirdly quiet, which we get the greatest fucking 3D effects in any movie ever. The acting that Chili did is just so bad.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
But this moment, this is why I loved this film so much when I originally watched this series. Look at the fucking eyeball. This movie had a nearly $3 million budget. It's so bad. Jason then decides to pop by his old friend and say hi, but Chris isn't really into that. She's gone a little bit past their friendship now, Jason, come on man, you're getting a bit old, you need to make friends your age. Chris then does a smaller version of a Survivor Girl run similar to Ginny's, and decides to put up a little bit of a fight to her old friend. Apparently they've just not gotten along since. She does some pretty decent slashers, she's like knocking him down, like, yeah Chris, you fucking go. After the brief confrontation, Chris decides to head to her van and try to get the hell out there, but it's kind of fucked up because of that shitty bridge, so she decides to head over to the barn and put up a final fight against Jason. After a brief scuffle, she's able to hang him from the top of the barn, and that's it, guys. That's the end of Friday the 13th. Whoa, haha, fuck you, Jason can't die. Yeah, somehow this part is never really explained at all, even though you literally heard his neck snap. But Jason's fine. He lifts up his mask so he's able to get free, giving Chris some nice little PTSD shots where she suddenly remembers everything that's happened, even though she definitely knows who he is. I mean, what other creepy guy with a deformed face would you see in the woods? Come on, Chris, it's not rocket science. Just before Chris is about to get done in by Jason, though, we have Biker Ex Machina, similar to the way that Paul saved Ginny at the last moment in the previous movie. But Jason's still got his teaching hat on, and he teaches the biker not to be so rude and gives him a nice little beat down. Chris isn't very happy though with Jason's teaching methods, and decides the only good thing to do really is to axe him from this job. With a nice little blow to the head, Jason collapses on the floor, officially dead in this franchise. He's not dead. 7 more canonical movies in this series before it's rebooted. In a scene that's homaging the original film, since this one was only meant to be a trilogy and this is meant to be the end, so it'd be like the beginning and the end shit, Chris decides to go on the canoe onto the lake, and after a weird half-vision, half-real thing, it's once again never really explained, a bit like Part 2's ending, Chris ends up seeing Jason, and Jason runs towards him and turns out not to be real, and in a complete reference to Alice's final proper moments in the original film, Mrs. Voorhees comes out of the water and grabs Chris in the same way that Jason grabbed Alice in the first one and pulls her down into the water. That's when Chris ends up waking up, and all the cops are around, he can save them, they're checking around, they're seeing all the dead bodies and stuff. Chris is then carted away in a similar way that Ginny was at the end of Part 2, only for us to see at the very end of the film that Jason hasn't moved. Although, another slight fun fact which I'll actually go into in a sec, this was meant to be the end of Jason. Maybe not the end of the franchise, depending on who you ask, but this was meant to be the end. So that final shot was meant to be the grand finale of Jason Voorhees. That obviously didn't happen. Now, the movie itself is probably, like, the best storyline related, because it's the first one to actually have, like, a proper storyline. Like, it's got the whole friend dynamic, it's got the backstory with Chris versus Jason, it references the events of the first 2 movies at the beginning on the news and stuff. And it's just a lot more for that kind of stuff, it's a lot more solid than the first 2. But one of the biggest issues of this film, for me, has always been the 3D effects.
This is all the exercise I need.
Overall, I'd actually say the characters were like the best in the franchise at this point, because you had, well, the stereotypes that had come into later movies. No one was really like these people at the time. This kind of started the whole stoners in horror movies. Like, there was already the slut and stuff. This had like the stoners, this had like the big butchy jocks, this had like the pregnant woman and her twatty boyfriend. Like, it had the comedy relief, like being fully comedy relief this time, not just that dick in Part 2. But all the characters ended up being like their own like archetypes, the important part of actually watching a slasher movie. And all that kind of stemmed from this installment. As well as the fact, obviously, this installment brought Jason's mask, which is just so fucking cool. But no, the 3D effects are just so obviously forced and cringy. I mean, that scene where they're all juggling, like, it just looks bad, and it would have even looked bad in the 1980s. Like, my dad watched these movies around the time when they all came out, and he said it was even bad back then, for crying out loud. But if you can look past all that kind of stuff, like I'm able to, I do think it is the best out of the original trilogy, just because it stuck with the similar formula, but it tried to be so new, and it tried to be a lot more likeable. I mean, the characters in Part 2 were shit, let's be honest. The only ones that were actually quite good were Mark and Vicky, and that was it. The rest of them were just disposable victims. In this one, you can remember the names, you can remember the different personalities, and it's just a lot more interesting to watch these characters, well, live and die. And honestly, the first time I ever watched it, I was actually really, like, shocked when Rick was killed by Jason through, like, the crappy head splat. And I honestly thought he'd get to the end just because of the fact like he was such a strong presence throughout the movie, almost as strong as Chris. And that's why I enjoyed this installment a hell of a lot more than the first two. For this film we technically had 6 fun facts. The first one was the fact that this is like the best, let's just be honest. But in a similar way to how the original second film script was changed due to casting, Jeannie was meant to be the main protagonist of the whole movie. And like I said earlier, it was meant to be based on Halloween 2, and that just didn't go well. Apparently Amy Steele was actually up for it, she just wasn't able to because of like scheduling conflicts. And apparently she has said a few times in interviews and like at conventions and stuff, she's always kind of regretted never doing the third installment, but she's also happy that she didn't because she's a fan of the franchise and she liked the character of Chris. So it's a kind of win-lose situation. As mentioned earlier, this is also the first film to feature Jason with hockey mask, and the funniest fact is, this only happened because the reception for part 2 was Jason was really strong, except for like the shitty head. And the only reason why we actually chose a hockey mask is because one of the production designers was a massive hockey fan, and he just happened to have a mask in his bag at the time. And we tried it, it didn't look the best initially, but then they were able to mould it to like the actor's head and like the facial prosthetics, and it just ended up becoming so iconic that I can't think of a hockey mask without thinking of Jason, and I don't think many other people can anyway. The film can also be credited as kind of like the reboot of the 3D like market. I mean, there was 3D stuff in the 1950s which looked awful as fuck, and this never really aged very well. But it was because of this movie that like the third Jaws movie, Jaws 3D, ended up going 3D, and why a lot of the kind of 3D movies of the like 1980s to even the early 2000s before James Cameron rebooted it with Avatar, a lot of them kind of stemmed from this movie, and I think that's really impressive for like a third installment in a really cheap slasher flick. But when it came to critics, similar to my feelings towards the 3D effect, that was the highest criticism, and I think it's kind of an interesting fact. There were even like some reviews that were like, this is the best in the franchise, but it's the worst in the franchise just because of so bad the 3D effects are, and that was like reviews from the 1980s, so it's really just not me having got 3D effects, because I like it if it worked well, but with this movie it's just very forced. The film was also, like I said earlier, meant to be the end of Jason. Like, his body being shown at the end was meant to be him dead. That was him done. Paramount didn't want to do anymore, but then this one ended up being the most successful, so they decided to do a fourth one, which was the final chapter. And the fun fact is, the initial script of the final chapter didn't even have Jason in it. It had his brother taking over the mantle of killer, pretending to be him. And when that kind of got fought up, they decided not to, after seeing just a fan reception towards Jason in this one. It was so strong and so positive. So they stuck with him for another installment, even though Paramount like famously hate the franchise. Like, they were never proud of it, they hated it, they wanted it to like die out, but it just wouldn't. And I'm very glad it didn't, to be honest. And I think slasher fans in general are very happy for that too. Part 3 is easily my favourite of the original 3 films. Like, there's nothing too new about it, but the fact it stuck with the same formula and just made it a little bit more fun and more likeable is why I love this film so much. I'd easily rate it in like my top 4 Friday films just because it's so good. The kills are awesome, they may not have Tom Savini makeup, but they're still really good, and they're just a lot more violent, but even though they're more violent, they're not like cheesy, they're still realistic, they're still clever, and you can tell that a lot of effort was put into every single one of them, maybe except the eyeball. And like I said, this film had Chris Higgins, and she was like the most badass survivor girl ever, and I'm really, really disappointed that the actress like famously hates the films, because I would have loved to have seen her come back in a couple more. So anyway, thank you for watching my review of Friday the 13th Part 3, or Friday the 13th 3D. But anyway, please be sure to like, share and subscribe if you did enjoy this video, and thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all for the next review.